Welcome to my channel. Subscribe and enjoy my new stories every day. I sat in my office, the hum of the computer and the gentle clatter of my fingers on the keyboard forming a familiar symphony. The glow of the monitor cast a cold light over stacks of papers and half-empty coffee mugs. My life as an IT specialist wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and it provided for my family. Marcia, my wife of 12 years, worked in the same field, though her days were filled with client meetings and business trips. I had always assumed her career, and the demands that came with it, were a testament to her dedication to our future. I couldn't have been more wrong. 3 years ago, a shift occurred that, at first, seemed inconsequential. Marcia's phone was suddenly glued to her hand. She started coming home later and later, offering tired excuses about last-minute calls or client dinners that ran over. I noticed, but I didn't react. I trusted her. I dismissed the gnawing feeling in my gut as paranoia, an ugly, insecure voice that I didn't want to give power. One night, while working late to meet a project deadline, I noticed the subtle glow of Marcia's phone screen on the dresser. The room was bathed in the soft glow of our bedside lamps, casting delicate shadows across the walls. She had gone to bed early, citing exhaustion. As I glanced up from my laptop, I saw her breathing deep and steady, wrapped in the duvet, oblivious to the silent storm brewing inside me. A ping, almost too soft to be heard, caught my attention. Her phone, angled just enough for me to catch a glimpse, displayed a message preview: "Can't wait to taste you again tomorrow, baby." Time seemed to halt as the words etched themselves into my brain. I felt the rush of blood in my ears, a searing heat that spread from my chest to my fingertips. My instinct screamed to wake her, demand answers, throw accusations that would splinter whatever thin layer of peace we still had. But I didn't. I needed to know more before confronting her. The next day passed in a daze. Marcia left for work, her lips brushing my cheek with practiced familiarity, leaving behind the ghost of trust that was now shattered. I watched her walk out the door, a smile that once filled me with warmth now felt like an ice pick to the heart. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my coffee as it grew cold. Every detail of our marriage replayed in my mind, moments I had cherished tainted now by suspicion. I dove into a different kind of work. For the next week, I pored over phone bills, cross-referencing numbers and dates, looking for inconsistencies. I traced calls to unfamiliar area codes, jotted down times when her trips overlapped with suspicious expenses. The Virginia number appeared too often to be a coincidence. Each discovery was a dagger, carving deeper into the fabric of trust I'd woven over a decade. Evenings became a theater of pretense. Marcia would come home late, claiming fatigue, while I masked my anger with feigned sleepiness. When she sat across from me at dinner, I studied her, noting the slight quiver in her voice when she talked about her day or the way her eyes darted around the room as if avoiding mine. I waited for her to slip, to offer a tell, but she was meticulous, her lies practiced and polished. The feeling that something vital had died between us grew stronger each day, and still, I said nothing. Late one night, the house steeped in silence, I opened Marcia's laptop. We had shared passwords for years, a symbol of trust one now wielded like a key to a vault of betrayal. Her emails revealed more than I was ready to see: long, flirty chains with someone listed as N. At first, they seemed innocuous, but then the tone shifted, becoming personal, intimate. References to dinners, hotel rooms, private jokes that left me cold with fury. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling. It was real. This wasn't a misunderstanding or some flirtatious banter. It was an affair, brazenly parading itself in front of me, wrapped in layers of deceit. The memory of her eyes, once a source of comfort, now felt like a lie I had willingly embraced. Marcia was still asleep when I returned to our room. I watched her, the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest betraying no guilt, no acknowledgement of the bomb she had planted in our life. Part of me wanted to reach out, to shake her awake and beg her to tell me it wasn't true. But the part of me that had always protected my pride, that stood up in the face of every trial, kept my hands at my sides. The confrontation could wait. As the days bled into weeks, my resolve sharpened. I started thinking of what would come next, how to pull myself from the wreckage that Marcia's choices had created. In those silent hours, a plan began to form, not out of rage but out of necessity. The man I had been, the one who would have pleaded and wept, was gone. In his place stood someone who was ready, not just to survive, but to reclaim the life that had been stolen from him. I began laying groundwork. I contacted a lawyer, started shifting assets quietly. I knew the moment would come when the truth had to be spoken aloud, when Marcia would stand before me, stripped of her practiced lies, and I would be ready. The realization that my life as I knew it was over was both a weight and a liberation. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of control return, steadying the chaos within me. I spent one last night sitting at the dining room table, a silent guardian over the memories we had built, ready for the storm I was about to unleash. The morning sun crept into the room, slicing through the curtains and casting thin beams of light onto the beige carpet. I watched them dance across the floor as I sipped my coffee, its warmth doing nothing to thaw the ice that had settled in my chest. Marcia moved about the kitchen with her usual grace, oblivious to the way my gaze tracked her every move, studying, searching for the cracks that I now knew were there. "Did you sleep okay last night?" she asked, her tone light, casual, as she poured herself a glass of orange juice. "Yeah, as well as I could," I replied, forcing a smile. It was becoming second nature, this charade. I nodded toward her glass. "Big presentation today?" She paused, her hand tightening around the cup, a flicker of hesitation. "Yeah, something like that," she said quickly, eyes not quite meeting mine before she glanced at her watch. "I should get going. I might be late again tonight." "Of course," I said, the words tasting bitter as they left my mouth. She kissed me on the cheek, a gesture that once would have made me smile but now felt mechanical. I listened as her heels clicked against the hardwood floor, the sound receding as she moved toward the door and out of our life as it once was. The minute the door closed, I exhaled, releasing the tension that had been coiled within me like a snake ready to strike. My phone vibrated on the counter. It was Paul, my best friend since college, a guy who knew how to read between the lines. "Hey, Alex," his voice came through, chipper and unsuspecting. "Hey," I managed, trying to mask the storm that churned beneath the surface. "Just calling to see if we're still on for drinks this Friday." I hesitated, staring at the wall, the beige paint that suddenly felt suffocating. "Yeah, Paul, we're on. I could use it." He chuckled, not sensing the weight of my words. "Great. Catch you then." The call ended, but it had stirred something in me. I needed to act, not just sit and wait for more damning evidence to fall into my lap. The time had come to confirm what I already knew, to confront the ghost of trust that lingered between Marcia and me. I grabbed the spare keys to her car and walked out to the driveway, the crisp autumn air biting at my skin. The interior of her car was immaculate, as always, but my hands trembled as I opened the glove compartment. Maps, receipts, gum wrappers. It all looked harmless until I unfolded a crumpled receipt from a hotel 2 towns over, dated just 3 days ago. The name on it wasn't hers, but it was charged to our joint account. The name N. Lewis leaped off the page as if mocking me. I clenched the receipt in my fist, feeling the sting as the edges pressed into my skin. My mind raced. So, it was real. The name that had haunted me in emails was now here, in print, tangible and undeniable. I stuffed the receipt back into the glove box and leaned back, breathing hard. The adrenaline buzzed in my veins like an electric current, urging me to go further. When she returned that evening, the house was silent. I heard her heels tapping down the hall, her voice as she called out, "Alex. You home?" I stayed seated in the dim light of the living room, the crumpled hotel receipt now smoothed out on the coffee table before me. The quiet thrum of the TV played in the background, some late-night talk show that I wasn't paying attention to. When Marcia appeared in the doorway, she froze. Her eyes darted from me to the slip of paper, and for the briefest moment, her confident facade slipped. She covered it quickly, but I had seen it. "What's this?" I asked, my voice measured and calm, so unlike the storm inside me. She blinked, her gaze turning steely. "It's nothing, Alex. Just a mix-up with work. I told you we've been putting expenses on the joint card." I nodded slowly, a cold smile touching my lips. "Funny, because I don't recall you mentioning any trip that involved a hotel under the name N. Lewis." The silence between us was thick, stretched taut like a wire ready to snap. Marcia's jaw tightened. "Are you snooping through my things now?" "Answer the question," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. She crossed her arms, leaning against the frame, her body language defiant, but I could see the crack, the slight tremble in her posture. "Work trips get booked under different names sometimes. It's how the company handles reimbursements," she said, each word laced with rehearsed nonchalance. But her eyes were shifting, darting from the paper to the shadowed corners of the room, anywhere but at me. "I don't believe you," I said, rising slowly. "You see, I've looked at the credit card statements, Marcia. The dinner dates, the hotels. All under that name, N. Lewis. Who is he, Marcia?" The room seemed to shrink as the question hung in the air. Her eyes narrowed, mouth opening as if to throw another lie at me, but then she sighed, the fight seeping out of her. "It's not what you think," she whispered, eyes glistening under the dim light. "Then tell me," I demanded, stepping closer. "What is it?" But she didn't answer. Instead, she pushed past me, her heels clicking urgently down the hall, the door to our bedroom slamming shut. I stood there, the silence roaring in my ears. The confrontation wasn't over, but tonight, we had reached a stalemate. I picked up the receipt, folding it carefully. This war would need more than anger, it would need precision and patience. I slept on the couch that night, staring at the ceiling as shadows shifted with each passing car. The receipt lay on the coffee table, a quiet reminder of the confrontation that had cracked but not shattered the silence of our home. I replayed Marcia's reaction over and over, dissecting her words, her expressions. The defiance, the guilt, and finally, the retreat. She was cornered, but not beaten. And I knew I had to be smarter, more strategic. The following morning, Marcia emerged from the bedroom wearing the mask of normalcy she had perfected over the years. Her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, her makeup flawless, but the tight set of her jaw betrayed her. She glanced at me as she poured coffee, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. "About last night," she started, keeping her voice even. I put down the newspaper I wasn't reading and met her gaze. "Don't," I said, cutting her off. "Not unless you're going to tell me the truth." Her eyes flickered, searching mine for a crack, a hint of weakness. Finding none, she sighed and took a sip of her coffee. The morning passed with an uneasy truce, each of us pretending the other wasn't there. By the time she left for work, I felt a small, bitter victory. But it wasn't enough. After she drove off, I made a call to Paul. He picked up after the second ring, his usual cheerfulness greeting me. "Hey, Alex, everything all right?" "No, Paul. I need a favor." My voice was tight, the words harder to push out than I expected. "Of course. What's going on?" I hesitated, the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me. "I need you to help me with some surveillance." There was a pause, followed by the sound of a chair creaking as he shifted. "Surveillance? Alex, you're not serious." "I am," I said firmly. "And I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." Paul sighed, the kind of sigh that acknowledged the boundary we were crossing. "All right. Tell me what you need." Within a few hours, Paul arrived at the house with a small black duffel bag. We sat at the dining table as he unpacked it, pulling out a set of discrete cameras and an audio recorder. "I picked these up a while back for a project," Paul said, his tone flat. "Never thought they'd be used for something like this." "Me neither," I admitted. The guilt gnawed at the edges of my resolve, but I pushed it down. "But I need to know, Paul. I need to see it for myself." We worked in silence, placing the cameras in strategic spots, one in the living room, another angled to capture the front hallway, and one in our bedroom. The audio recorder was tucked under the bed, its red light blinking faintly before I turned it off. "Are you sure about this?" Paul asked, his eyes scanning mine for doubt. "No," I said, swallowing hard. "But it has to be done." Paul clapped me on the shoulder. "Call me if you need anything else." He left, taking the tension with him, but only for a moment. As soon as the door clicked shut, the silence of the house returned, heavier than before. The next few days were a blur of watching and waiting. Each evening, Marcia came home, exchanged minimal words with me, and retreated to the bedroom. I watched her on the monitor in real time, my stomach twisting every time she picked up her phone or typed furiously into her laptop. She was cautious, more so than I expected. But on the third day, just as I was beginning to doubt the entire plan, I heard her speak a name. "Nate, I can't keep doing this," her voice trembled through the speaker, barely more than a whisper. My blood ran cold. Nate. N. Lewis. The name that had been a dark question mark in my mind now had a voice, a presence in my home that I couldn't touch. "Yeah, I know. It's getting harder." "He's starting to suspect," she continued, pacing the room. I watched as she ran her hand through her hair, eyes glancing nervously at the door. "No, I haven't told him anything. I need more time." I squeezed my fists until my knuckles whitened. Each word cut deeper, a scalpel peeling back the final layer of my denial. There was no ambiguity left, the affair was real, living, breathing through the screen in front of me. I closed my eyes and leaned back, the world tilting as my emotions surged from betrayal to rage and back again. When Marcia emerged from the bedroom that night, she didn't look at me. She walked straight to the kitchen, poured herself a drink, and disappeared onto the back porch. I followed, my heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. She started when she saw me, a flash of guilt crossing her face before she masked it. "Can't sleep?" she asked, her voice too casual, too controlled. "Neither can you," I replied, leaning against the doorframe. She sipped her drink, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the yard. "I was just thinking." "About what?" I pressed, each word careful, testing the limits. "Life," she said after a pause, swirling the liquid in her glass. "About where we're going." I stepped closer, watching her tense at my approach. "And where are we going, Marcia?" She didn't answer, just looked at me with eyes that once radiated warmth but now held only a guarded coolness. The silence grew until it was unbearable, and she turned away, leaving me staring at her back, the space between us filled with all the words we weren't saying. I let her go inside, watching as she disappeared down the hall. The cameras would catch whatever came next, but for now, I needed air. I stepped onto the lawn, the cool grass pressing against my feet as I tipped my head back to look at the sky. The stars blinked down at me, indifferent and unreachable. The life I thought I had was over, a fiction that had unraveled in whispers and shadows. The night stretched out around me, deep and silent, as I made a decision. It wasn't enough to confront her with words. It wasn't enough to end things quietly. If Marcia had shattered our life, then she would feel the sting of every broken piece. And I would make sure she knew that betrayal didn't come without consequence. I watched the house from the driveway, my breath fogging up the window as the engine cooled. The evening had settled over our neighborhood, with lights flickering to life in nearby homes, casting warm glows against the crisp autumn air. Inside, shadows moved, whispers of normalcy that had become my torment. Marcia was home. Tonight, there would be no more secrets. I stepped into the living room, where the faint hum of the television filled the air. Marcia looked up from the couch, her eyes widening with surprise, then narrowing with suspicion. She had grown accustomed to my silence, the tension simmering between us like a pot ready to boil over. "Where were you?" she asked, setting down her wine glass. "Out," I replied flatly, meeting her gaze with a calm she couldn't read. I dropped my keys on the table, the metallic clatter punctuating the silence. "We need to talk." She tensed, fingers tightening around the stem of her glass. "About what?" Her tone was defensive, rehearsed. I walked to the bookshelf, tracing the edge with my fingertips before turning to face her. "About Nate." The name hit her like a slap. Her eyes flinched, barely perceptible, but it was there. She took a sip of her wine, masking her panic with practiced ease. "I told you, Alex, it's just work." I nodded, letting the lie hang in the air. "I know. And I know that's not the whole story." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, the screen glowing with the captured footage of her late-night calls, the moments when her voice dripped with whispered apologies and plans that didn't include me. Her face paled as the recording played. The sound of her voice, raw and vulnerable, filled the room. "Nate, I can't keep doing this." I watched her reaction, the disbelief, then the realization that her lies had run out. "Alex, please," she began, but I held up a hand. "Save it," I said, my voice low and cold. "This isn't just about you cheating. This is about everything you've destroyed without a second thought. Our life, our trust, everything." Marcia's eyes filled with tears, genuine or not, it didn't matter anymore. "It's not what you think," she whispered, taking a tentative step toward me. "It never is," I said, turning away as I heard a car pull up outside. Headlights swept across the living room before going dark. The knock at the door was firm, practiced. I looked at Marcia, who glanced between me and the door, confusion written across her face. I opened the door to find Paul standing there, a figure looming just behind him. "My lawyer." They both stepped inside, the room suddenly feeling smaller. "Alex, what's going on?" Marcia's voice quavered, her fear palpable now. Paul looked at her with the quiet disdain of a friend who had come to hate what he saw. "Marcia, I think it's time we lay everything out," he said. My lawyer nodded, stepping forward. "We're here to settle things, Marcia. Your infidelity has consequences, and tonight we're putting an end to it." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she realized the magnitude of what was happening. "Alex, I love you." I was confused. "We can fix this, please." Her voice broke, desperation cracking through the thin veneer of her dignity. I glanced at Paul, whose eyes were set like stone. "Do you want to tell her?" he asked. I shook my head, taking a deep breath. "No. This part, she hears from me." I turned back to Marcia, who stood frozen, clutching her glass as if it could anchor her. "Marcia, you don't just cheat on someone you claim to love. You don't break them apart piece by piece and expect them to watch. You don't hide behind lies and hope it all stays buried. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the final piece, the signed divorce papers. The room fell into a stunned silence as I laid them on the coffee table. "I'm done, Marcia. I'll be keeping the house. You'll be out by the end of the week." Her knees buckled, and Paul moved forward instinctively, stopping when I raised a hand. She sank onto the couch, staring at the papers through tear-blurred eyes. "Alex, please," she whispered, broken. Before I could respond, another knock at the door startled us all. This time, I wasn't expecting anyone. Paul's brows furrowed as I moved to open it. Standing on the porch was a woman I didn't recognize at first, a brunette, sharply dressed, eyes scanning the scene inside before landing on Marcia. "Marcia, the woman said, stepping into the room without an invitation. Nate's wife. The room turned electric, shock and horror rippling across Marcia's face. "What are you doing here?" she gasped. The woman's lips curled into a thin smile. "You thought you could destroy my life and walk away unscathed?" She glanced at me and nodded. "Seems like tonight is the night for truth." Marcia crumpled, the weight of every betrayal pressing down on her at once. I stood there, a silent witness to the unraveling of the woman I once thought I'd spend my life with. But there was no satisfaction, only the cold clarity of knowing that justice, in whatever twisted form it took, had finally been served. I turned to Paul, who met my eyes with a nod. "Let's go," he said quietly, and we stepped out into the night, leaving Marcia to face the wreckage alone.